Session here, and there's no possible way anyone could doze off during the talks we have because there are some really interesting talks. Beginning with a keynote speaker, Dr. Metta who's going to speak on, I'm intrigued by the title, How to Save the World in a Hurry. And Dr. Spencer is a professor Emeritus in Sociology at the University of Toronto, and she was the founder and coordinator of Peace and Conflict Studies program. She's also president of the Science for Peace, I guess that's an organization as well, and editor of Peace Magazine, author of Foundations of Modern Sociology, 2 Aspirins and a Comedy, How Television Can Enhance Health and Society, and my son, 15-year-old son, should be here for that one. And The Russian Quest for Peace and Democracy, and over 100 articles. So welcome, Dr. Spencer.
Thank you.
Bravo.
Okay, well, mostly when we talk about environmental issues, we think of them these days as somehow in competition with peace issues, that you get to work on one or the other, but you can't do both, and they don't have much connection. So my talk today is an effort to situate the two in the same framework. Now, in the planet's history, there have been 5 catastrophic extinctions of species. The biggest one, called the Great Dying, happened 250 million years ago and destroyed 96% of all animal species in the oceans and 70% of all vertebrates on land. Many scientists attribute this to runaway global warming. Volcanoes in northern Russia spewed greenhouse gas and warmed the planet by 6 degrees. This melted methane hydrate crystals on the ocean floors, creating a vicious circle until the global temperature reached 15 degrees above normal. Not until 10 million years later did life really recover. The UN is warning us to change course, lest the world's temperature increase 4 degrees during this century. The temperature threshold at which methane clathrates will melt is unknown. But this is not the only threat to humankind's survival. Here, I'll review the most serious dangers and appraise some possible preventive measures. The ancients believed that the world was composed of 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water. We face calamities in all 4, plus an additional one. We can't just pick one problem and leave the rest of them for later. We must address them all and all together, because they're interconnected, forming a single package. Although there may be millions of useful actions we can take to help save the world, we have to start someplace, and the question is where? Well, I think the answer will come from treating these 5 issues as a single system. To multitask, it helps to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I have nothing against birds, but I think we need to kill 5 of them with 1 stone. Since all 5 issues affect each other, I look for solutions to one of them with knock-on effects to help solve the others. Where we should begin saving the planet is with multi-purpose technological innovations, especially ones that are ready, say within 5 years, to become massive projects. Let's look for specific projects that can be implemented rapidly on a huge scale without any negative side effects, and that will help solve all the other problems at the same time. Actually, I've only found one thing that meets all these criteria, and you're going to be surprised to hear what it is, because it doesn't come up in this conference and such. Here are the 5 problems that threaten human survival, the 5 birds that we want to kill with 1 stone. Earth, which I'll call soil, because it's not only a question of quantity but also quality, its capacity to produce food and habitat. Air, Air contains our biggest problem, greenhouse gases that cause climate change. Fire, let's call it by a more general term, energy. Water, both fresh and seawater, plus one additional danger that you're familiar with, defense. Military preparations that supposedly make us more secure, but which often do the opposite. I like acronyms to help me remember this, so here's the one I use, WADES, as in my child wades in mud puddles for fun. This stands for water, air, defense, energy, and soil. We start with water problems. People need fresh water for drinking, cooking, cleaning, manufacturing, and moistening agricultural soil. Less than 3% of Earth's water is fresh, including the almost 2% that's frozen in ice, less than 1% that's groundwater and soil moisture, and less than 0.01% that's in lakes and rivers. We're going to need more fresh water as our population grows to 10 billion. Yet already, the aquifers are being depleted faster than replenished. Rivers are drying up for the lack of melting snowpacks. Fresh water is being poisoned by industry, mining, fracking, and farm chemicals. So our first challenge is to conserve fresh water. Another water challenge involves the oceans, which are so deep that they make up 99% of the planet's living space. The seas are warming up. When sea turtles bury their eggs in the sand, instead of hatching, the heat sometimes cooks them now. Some marine species are moving to cooler regions of the ocean, thus starving other creatures that depend on them for food. How can we stop the warming of the oceans? By stopping the warming of the air. As I said, all 5 problems are connected. Meanwhile, oxygen is declining in rivers and seas. There are 405 dead zones in oceans, the largest of which covers 70,000 square kilometers. Marine life can't survive there, partly because of the nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizer runoff from farms, which feed algae blooms. However, even the waters near Antarctica have lost about 3% of the oxygen in the last decade. Fortunately, dead zones are reversible if the chemical runoff is halted. Here we see the connection between water problems and soil problems. The ocean is also becoming more acidic. It had normally been slightly alkaline, but has become about 30% more acid in the past 2 centuries. Today, even dissolving the shells of oysters, lobsters, and corals. The acidity is in the top 100 meters of the ocean. When the surface meets the atmosphere, the carbon dioxide in the air dissolves as carbonic acid. Over the years, so much of it has dissolved that carbon is 140 times more concentrated in the ocean than in the air. Oceans have been a sink to contain excess carbon from the atmosphere, but now they're getting saturated. I guess the toughest bird to kill is the acidification of the oceans. None of the measures that I've explored seem capable of reversing it quickly. Reducing carbon in the atmosphere will solve it within a certain century or 2, but not within 5 years, which is, I think, our realistic time frame. Air problems. Of the 5 big problems, you already know about one, the greenhouse gases in the air. The most worrisome gases are carbon dioxide, methane, which is what we use in our stoves, and nitrous oxide. About half of all global warming is caused by carbon dioxide. At the dawn of civilization, the amount of atmospheric CO2 was between 275 and 285 parts per million. But it started rising sharply at the beginning of the 19th century, and in 2013 reached 400 parts per million. Some scientists say that 350 parts per million is tolerable, while others say that CO2 levels must not be allowed to exceed 320. Anyway, since we're already at 400, obviously we must not only prevent future emissions, but remove some of the CO2 that's already in the air. Fortunately, there are methods for sucking carbon out of the air and either locking it away or recycling it as a valuable source of energy. You hear about reducing emissions so much that I won't really focus on that, but I'll talk more about capturing and sequestering or reusing the ambient carbon. Did you know that fuel can be made from CO2? It can. And whenever we use it, instead of adding CO2 to the air, we're actually eliminating some that's already there. Such a fuel is called carbon negative. It helps to solve our energy problem while we solve our air problem. Two birds with one stone. Defense problems. If you're alarmed by climate change, you should also be frightened by military arsenals. Many people, of course, consider weapons necessary for our security, useful tools for deterring foreign enemies who would attack if we didn't have means of retaliating. We're all supposed to believe that Canada has enemies, or otherwise, why would our government plan to spend up to $126 billion for new fighter planes? But in many cases, weapons have negative security value. For living with them is more dangerous than living without them. This is especially true of nuclear weapons. Military officers find them useless in real wars, where their only purpose is deterrence, to warn your potential enemy that if he strikes you with his nuclear missiles, you will immediately destroy his side. In order to make this threat credible, you cannot wait for his nukes to arrive and wipe you out. You must launch your own missiles as soon as you've been warned that his are en route. But missiles are swift. Neither side can wait longer than 10 or 15 minutes to verify that the other side's missiles are on the way. So a nuclear war can begin by mistake. At least 13 times since 1962, nuclear weapons were nearly launched, and researchers claim that the risks are still rising. I'll mention one such event. A Soviet officer, Colonel Stanislav Petrov, was in command of a bunker near Moscow in 1983 when NATO was holding war games in Europe. The radar began warning that nuclear missiles were en route, probably from Montana. Petrov was supposed to begin retaliating within 15 minutes, but he refused to do so, and thereby prevented World War III. Probably the false alarm was caused by clouds reflecting sunlight that looked like a missile's plume. So Colonel Petrov saved the world. My friends and I sent him $500 with our thanks. Nevertheless, some governments still build nuclear weapons. For example, India has about 130 nuclear bombs and Pakistan about 100. They have fought 3 wars and they still threaten each other. If they ever use even half of them in a limited nuclear war, 22 million people will die from blast, acute radiation, and firestorms right away. And this is because then a global famine will kill 2 billion more people within 10 years. This is because the bombs will explode over cities, creating black smoke that will cover the northern hemisphere and blot out the sun. Summer temperatures will stay below freezing and crops will not grow. Most of us will starve. Do the Indian and Pakistani military leaders realize that they can't use their nukes? If so, why do they want to keep them? Well, I don't know. But our only means of security is to abolish every nuclear weapon on Earth. And that's my specialty. I figure that it's pointless to solve climate change and prevent mass starvation if we let a handful of stubborn politicians blow up the world anyway. And that could happen. There are still 16,400 nuclear weapons on the planet, mostly owned by the US and Russia, with about 2,000 of them set to launch on warning. Each warhead is 7 to 85 times more powerful than the atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. By now, any nation or major terrorist group could build a nuclear weapon if they had the fissile material. It's not hard to do. People know now. Fortunately, highly enriched uranium and plutonium are kept under guard. But every nuclear power plant in the world produces plutonium. And the more of it there is, the more accessible it is to thieves. Here we see the connection between two of our problems, energy and defense. It's questionable how long we can have nuclear power without also seeing nuclear weapons proliferate. Energy bombs. The only source of energy for early Homo sapiens was food, about 2,000 daily calories per adult. By 100,000 years ago, they had discovered fire, and their per capita use of energy had increased 2.5 times. Industrialization increased it more. By 1970, people consumed 115 times as much energy as primitive man. Our own lifestyle depends on vast amounts of fossil fuel, energy that plants produced by photosynthesis before the dinosaurs lived. Gradually, it has become harder to obtain such fuel. A few years ago, people predicted that our fossil fuels would soon be exhausted. Fortunately, or perhaps unfortunately, new technologies, the tar sands, fracking, etc., have made more oil and gas accessible, though with risks to the environment. So the danger to humankind is not the shortage of these fuels, but the fact that using them is so harmful. For example, there's plenty of natural gas now, which is mainly methane, a mixed blessing. If it leaks into the air, it's a far worse greenhouse gas than CO2. But if it's burned, it's only half as harmful a greenhouse gas as petroleum. Inevitably, some of it leaks. Moreover, there are stupendous quantities of frozen methane. Permafrost contains methane in frozen soil, or peat. The West Siberian bog alone contains methane equivalent to 1.7 trillion tons of CO2, more than humans have emitted in the past 200 years. Clathrates are lattice-shaped chemical structures that trap or contain molecules. There are methane clathrates at the bottom of the Arctic Ocean, which can be mined if other fuels are depleted. That would give us more time to change to sustainable fuel, and we may need more time. By 2035, only 25% of the world's fuel may come from sustainable sources. In the meantime, we have to choose between using fossil fuels that cause global warming and using expensive nuclear power with its potential for more Chernobyls and Fukushimas and its inevitable production of the essential ingredients for nuclear weapons. Again, we see links among 3 of our 5 problems: defense, energy, and air. Arguments over energy are so emotional that long-standing friendships can break up over them. Perhaps that's why we avoid mentioning the worst danger, the possibility that the methane deposits may melt and speed up global warming, as happened in the Great Dying. Some permafrost and clathrates are already melting. You can set fire to water puddles in the Arctic because of the methane they contain. Scientists are uncertain, but they hope it will be 50 years before the stuff melts on a grand scale. The worst case scenario is a giant burp, a huge bubble of methane emitted suddenly, in which case most or all animal species will become extinct. We must hurry. Soil problems. This planet has about 13 billion hectares of land. About 5 billion of the hectares could, to some degree, be used for agriculture, but only 1.5 billion hectares are permanently cultivated. So about 1/3 of the land is suitable for crop production, and some land is still available. Land is unsuitable for farming if it has the following disadvantages. Too hot, too cold, too rocky, too mountainous, too salty, too rainy, too snowy, too polluted, or too deficient in nutrients. Still, unsuitable land in deserts can be made arable again by reforestation and specific agricultural techniques. The soil is a sink that can sequester carbon. Trees especially absorb CO2 when they're still growing and retain it in their trunks until they die, when they rot or burn and release the stored up carbon back into the atmosphere. Reforestation is one of the most promising temporary ways of sequestering carbon. The soil holds carbon unless it's plowed, but tilling soil exposes the buried carbon to the air and lets it escape. For that reason, one important agricultural trend is the practice of no-till farming, whereby each seed is poked down into the ground by a drill. After the harvest, the residue can be left on the ground as a mulch instead of being plowed under. Over time, much of the planet has desertified, partly because farmers have cut forests to obtain farmland, and partly because wild animals no longer graze in herds. Although vegetarians believe that the earth cannot produce meat enough for future populations, some environmentalists argue that well-managed herds of animals can make the deserts fertile again. They keep livestock in tight herds and move them from one paddock to another every few days. The animals stir up the soil a bit and leave their droppings as fertilizer before moving on. Rotating herds restores degraded pasture land. In any case, the growing human population will require more cropland. However well managed, this will reduce natural habitat and genetic diversity. The biologist E.O. Wilson expects that up to half of all existing species will become extinct during this century. The human population may reach 10.5 billion by the year 2050, when it will begin to decline again. Unfortunately, the amount of food produced per capita may not keep up with this growth. The World Health Organization estimates that over 12% of all human beings are now malnourished. Yet, even so, greenhouse gas emissions from farmland are increasing each year. Where food production has kept up with population growth, this has been done by irrigating and fertilizing the soil and replacing human labor with heavy machines that burn fossil fuel. This kind of production is unsustainable. Phosphorus, necessary for fertilizer, is quickly being used up, while it's also being wasted, polluting rivers and oceans. Nitrous oxide emissions from fertilizers warm the atmosphere over 300 times as much as the same quantity of carbon dioxide. Any real solution requires that fertilizers be used less while food production increases. Is this possible? It will become even harder when Arctic ice melts and the higher sea levels submerge the land that's now farmed. Here we see that land, water, and air problems are all connected. So we turn now to solving all 5 problems. I've named 5 that will require a technological revolution and a mobilization of society in a crisis mode. Our survival is at stake, so let's strategize about how to achieve the following solutions. Can you read those? Here we are, our agenda, water. Well, we have to reduce the ocean's acidification and dead zones. Air. We have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and remove carbon that's already in the air. Defense. We need to disarm all the expensive weapons that jeopardize humankind's survival. Energy. Let's produce energy from renewable resources. Soil. Let's protect land and restore degraded soil to productivity. So let's save the oceans first. We must replenish the oxygen in their dead zones and reduce the carbon dioxide dissolved in their surface layer. To restore oxygen levels, we must stop pouring fertilizer down the rivers. How? By replacing much of the fertilizer with a cheap, abundant substance that's even better for the soil. This is charcoal, and it's usually called nowadays biochar. To reduce the acidity of the ocean, there are several possibilities, but none of them seems very promising. Some scientists want to pour lime or calcium bicarbonate into the seas, especially near coral reefs. Well, that would reduce the acidity locally, but not the whole ocean. A better innovation, I think, maybe, is the use of seaweed, such as kelp, as a source of ethanol, which can be mixed with gasoline or methane. It can replace fossil fuels without using the limited soil that's required for growing food. There's a special new bacterium that ferments seaweed into biobutanol, which is better than ethanol for cars. If 2.5% of the US coastline were used for seaweed growth, 6.8 billion gallons of fuel could be produced in a year. Well, how does that compare? It would replace 1/10 of the gasoline that the US consumes now per year. This process could become a major industry within 5 years. Most vehicles may switch to electric power, I expect, but there probably will always be some need for liquid fuel, especially for airplanes. By using seaweed or CO2 for fuel, we'll decrease ocean acidity a little, while also saving soil and producing energy without adding CO2 to the air. That's 4 birds with one stone, not bad. Enter the US Navy. Fuel for the planes on aircraft carriers must be delivered by other ships, sometimes in hostile water. However, some of the carriers are powered by nuclear reactors, and pretty soon they'll be producing the fuel on board for their planes using seawater. They use electrolysis to collect CO2 and hydrogen separately from the seawater, and then they combine the two gases in the presence of a catalyst, making liquid airplane fuel. Unfortunately, the electrolysis requires a lot of energy. Because the aircraft carriers have nuclear reactors, they can do this without emitting CO2. So the fuel is carbon neutral. Unfortunately, the process is inefficient. It uses more energy than it produces. There's no solution to the energy problem this way. So we have to say it only kills 2 birds with one stone, that is water and air. However, a civilian company in California is also producing methanol from seawater using renewable energy. I don't know what kind, wind or something. It's carbon neutral and less expensive than fuel made on board ship. One expert calculated that this method can produce fuel for 79 cents a liter, and that it will remove CO2 for the price of $114 per ton. That price is competitive with fossil fuels, but regrettably, the technology won't be ready to scale up as fast as we need it. So let's turn to saving the air. Carbon can also be captured from the atmosphere using 3 different methods. One scientist proposes to build artificial trees all around the world. Their leaves are like vertical Venetian lines coated with a resin that captures CO2 from the air as it blows through. The CO2 is removed and then buried or recycled to make methane, and the resin is reused. Since CO2 disperses all over the world, a molecule that was emitted in Timbuktu might be captured later in Buenos Aires or Shangri-La. It's more efficient to remove the CO2 where it is concentrated, instead of with these artificial trees. And that one place would of course be the flue from a fossil fuel burning power plant. CO2 can then be made into methane or used to grow algae. Algae absorbs a huge amount of carbon. And later, when it's squeezed, the algae's oil can be made into airplane fuel. The whole cycle is carbon neutral, since the algae remove as much carbon, time after time, as the airplane engines emit. So we move to saving the soil. Now we come to my favorite way of removing carbon from the atmosphere, while also enriching the soil. Ta-da! The winner is biochar. Some of you'd be surprised. In the Amazon Valley, biochar exists in deep piles where it was deposited thousands of years ago. The Indians collected waste from their gardens and kitchens, and they smoldered it in heaps covered with dirt, thereby limiting the presence of oxygen. The resulting charcoal was mixed with other materials, such as pottery shards, and buried, where it has kept CO2 sequestered from the air ever since, thousands of years. Today, machines produce biochar by pyrolysis, while also capturing the oils and gases for fuel. It can be made from any household or agricultural waste, such as corn stover, peanut shells, or the feathers, heads, and guts of poultry at a slaughterhouse. The biochar is then spread onto the soil, making it rich, black, and fertile. The biochar also retains moisture, restoring fertility even to degraded desert land. Plans are underway to revive parts of the Sahara Desert to farmland, while slowing climate change with biochar. Biochar helps solve all 5 of our existential problems, 5 birds with 1 stone. Many other innovations help with 1 or 2 problems, and several of them can produce carbon-neutral fuel. However, biochar is truly carbon negative. It can remove CO2 from the air and permanently sequester it. The technology is sufficiently advanced that it's possible to begin making biochar and biofuels worldwide as a major industry within 5 years. That's a photo of the biochar, and here's a machine that makes it. A 2009 report estimated conservatively that 1 gigaton per year of carbon can be stored in biochar by the year 2030. For comparison, the human use of fossil fuels now emits about 26 gigatons of CO2 per year. So obviously we still have a long way to go. We're not taking out a large fraction of it by 2030, but at least we can get started within a short period of time, and within a few more years after 2030, they figure that 9 gigatons of CO2 per year can be captured. And we'll be growing more and better food at the same time with the biochar, as well as reducing methane and nitrous oxide emissions and improving the soil's retention of water. Since the authors of the report were only concerned with the sequestration of carbon, they didn't even mention that biofuel is also produced during pyrolysis. However, other inventors are specializing in the fuel. Indeed, for $27,000, you can buy a machine that produces clean energy at less than 10 cents a kilowatt hour. Biochar is a win-win-win-win-win solution. It's not magic, but it can help significantly. this is the one I should have told you about. Water. Biochar retains moisture in farmlands, so it requires little or no irrigation. Air. Biochar reduces the amount of carbon in the atmosphere and keeps it locked away for thousands of years. Energy. Biochar produces oils and gases that can supplement other sources of energy. And soil. Biochar restores the fertility of degraded soil, replacing fertilizer and enabling plants to grow larger and healthier than if grown with ordinary farming methods. But saving the world will cost a lot. To pay for it, we need to tax carbon everywhere in the world. I'm not suggesting cap and trade, but a direct carbon tax. It's less bureaucratic, and there are fewer ways to avoid it if you pay for the tax at the pump. Then you ask, did you forget defense? No, I didn't forget defense. Biochar can help with defense and security too, by providing the best conceivable reason to abolish dangerous weapons, which we need to do for our own security. Canada can save pots of cash by not purchasing $125 billion worth of F-35 fighter planes, and the U.S. can save $640 billion over the next 10 years by disarming its nuclear weapons. Disarmament will not only make us safer, but will also cut the only item in the budget that's big enough. For example, I'd use some of that money for paralyzing the billions of dead pine trees in the Rockies that beetles killed because the winters have become too warm. If you have your own other ideas, well, good. Promote your own way of saving the world. But promise me that you'll go push some politicians. It is a political project. Every political party needs a coherent, comprehensive program. They don't have that. They have bits and pieces, but they need an overall game plan. So take some kind of comprehensive game plan to the leaders of your political party and demand that they put it on their platform. And I think we can kill 5 birds with one stone. Or to use more uplifting rhetoric, we can save the world. So let's make it happen within 5 years.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Smith, for a fascinating and provocative discussion. Questions?
So, just picking up on your last comment, so whether the Green Party does not have a comprehensive program of the nature that you just described? You mentioned no political party has one.
I don't see a comprehensive plan that says we've got to do all of these and we have to do them together, and
Yeah.
the reason is they're all interconnected.
Yeah.
That, I think, is, to me, that's really the argument that the peace movement needs, because we have failed to convince military people to get rid of, weapons.
Right.
And as well as failing to do a lot of other things, environmental things. But I think maybe the argument that might do it is to say that's the only way we can afford to do all of the environmental changes that we need to do. Now, that might move some people who would not otherwise be moved. On the other hand, the Tea Party is not going
Yeah.
to be affected. I don't know whether that, but I shouldn't speak for the Green Party. I probably will vote for the Green Party. I think they come the closest in Canada to a concern about environmental matters and defense matters too. But I'm not sure I could. If you asked me to tell you what their platform was, I couldn't quite do it.
As an executive member of the Quebec Green Party, I can tell you that we don't even have such a comprehensive program as you have just outlined. One fault is that there's a lack of lack of sufficient knowledge of all of these aspects. Secondly, there's not enough time in a Congress to deal with all of the points that you have mentioned, and there have been a limited number of Congresses up to this point. And this video will certainly be presented, to the Quebec Green Party.
Good. I hadn't thought about that.
Yes, and I would add that there is a particular political issue which concerns the use of uranium and the initial sort of concerns that you expressed. With respect to Iran, a great deal was made out of the nuclear program in Iran, and specifically the government of Israel was ready to create a preemptive military strike against Iran to forestall the supposed creation of nuclear weapons, nuclear bombs. However, there was even an academic from Israel who proposed in an editorial op-ed piece in the New York Times a preemptive nuclear strike against Iran some years ago, and we had an international Jewish petition denouncing that Israeli academic for that reason. However, if you actually examine, the centrifuges that Iran uses, they're of a medium size. They're not capable of concentrating uranium to a greater extent than 20%, even though a nuclear bomb requires a concentration of uranium which is about 93%. So it would have been impossible, and is impossible, for Iran to actually concentrate uranium to that degree with the medium-sized centrifuges that they have available at this time. The possibility of harvesting plutonium from nuclear reactor spent fuel is something that also requires, very heavy-duty, military type of centrifuges, which are not available to Iran, but are certainly available to the United States. And to avoid, such a potential, there are nuclear reactors that are conceivable, possible, that do not even use uranium, that use thorium. And China has now initiated the very first, nuclear reactor using thorium, which are much safer, cannot melt down like the Fukushima reactors. And in fact, 3 of the Fukushima reactors have melted down and are continuing to generate radioactivity at this time. And the efforts to cool them down is merely creating more pollution that are running off into the Pacific Ocean, despite efforts to stop this runoff. And that's an ongoing catastrophe that is still in the hands of a private industry and has not been taken in charge, by the Japanese government in an act of criminal irresponsibility, neglect. So those are the points that I would add.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned thorium. I didn't put it in because I don't actually know enough. About 3 or 4 years ago, I tried to do a kind of, I spent a month trying to look into thorium or other the next generation. People like Jim Hansen at NASA, who's the main environmental, global warming expert, favors using nuclear power, but he's looking for the next generation of reactors, which he claims will be safer. And then there's the thorium, which it's not quite the next generation, but it's a different angle. And I don't understand enough about the physics of it. I invited a guy. I hold a weekly lecture series at the University of Toronto throughout the academic year. So I invited a guy to give a lecture on thorium reactors. And we always videotape those lectures and put them on our website. So those of you who maybe have this technical knowledge to follow his argument, which I'm not sure I could quite get, you might want to look at his lecture. His name is John McNamee, McNamee, and all of these lectures, there are about 70 of them, on the Science for Peace webpage, but you have to go in a funny way. It's a YouTube thing, and you look for videos, and then you have to scroll and click, and it's hard to find them, but it's there. And some people might want to look at the thorium reactor issue, which I have no opinion, because there's disagreement about it.
Mm-hmm. Another point that I'd like to address is there is a difference of opinion in the Quebec political scene between the Quebec Green Party and the Quebec Solidaire, which has a very strong, green ecological program. And the disagreement is about the potential for electrification of cars, because the Quebec Green Party considers that it is a waste of materials and energy to conceive of converting, automobiles to electric function, and that in any case there's not enough lithium in the world to make all the batteries that would eventually be required for electric cars. So the proposal is to do the massive increase in public transportation and the electrification of public transportation in place of the private car, supplemented by cars for rent and taxis, of course. But the electric car is not something that we look forward to as a potential problem solver, but rather as a problem that is waiting to be created if it is to be pursued.
Well, if you really if you get good at making methanol can go into cars. I think with methanol you should put like $100 worth of extra coating inside the guts of your car, because it kind of corrodes it. So you have to it costs a little bit to fix it so you can use methanol, unlike ethanol. But if you could produce methanol with the amount of sustainable energy from other sources to fuel cars, that would be another solution.
In the short term, yes.
The problem is, 100 years from now, this will be easy. The question is, I think we don't have 100 years.
We may not even have 2 or 3 years.
2 or 3, well, I say 5 years, and I just gave a talk up at Owen Sound, and the high school students said, why 5 years? And I said, well, that's about how long it's going to take you to graduate and get good enough to have any influence.
Assuming you vote.
Any other questions?
Well, I have one more. You're associated with Science for Peace. And there's a big issue, of course, as you know, about scientists who've been disenfranchised or fired or whatever by the Harvard government. And picking up on your point about how we should propose this package to all political parties, it would be a great idea if we took your thesis, boiled it down, and we
Can you
had.
speak a little louder? Sorry, I think I'm losing some here.
If we took your paper, boiled it down to a few pages, and had as many eminent scientists sign on to it, and send that to the leaders of every one of the political parties, is that something
Feel
that you
free,
could?
whatever you think will work.
I
I'm going
mean,
to
you know the
publish
science
this
community better than I do. Is that?
How much effect it have on politicians? I
No,
don't know.
it's the scientists.
So it's gonna
How
be
many
easy.
scientists would sign on
To get scientists to sign on. I
to
see.
something like that?
I don't know.
It's going to be a Peace magazine, you said?
No, it's not going to be a Peace magazine, but I'm going to put it in the Science for Peace bulletin.
Oh.
We have a quarterly bulletin or so, and I'm going to print it there. So you see, it's called the President's Corner. It'll be my last one, because I'll be through. By the way, I'm going to be through as president of Science for Peace, and I'm almost sure to be, my successor will be Jim Turk. Some of you may know as the current director of the Canadian Association of University Teachers. He's retiring, moving back to Toronto, and is the only nominee for my position, so.
Dr. Spencer, prepare all this question.
Thank you very much, Metta. Very illuminating. Now, I believe it may have been Douglas Roche who recently Science for Peace honored in bringing out his new book. He may have been the one that said originally humanity is sleepwalking toward extinction. Or it may have been Kofi Annan, I'm not quite sure which. Now, this is a matter really of survival, and I would like to ask you and suggest to the rest of us that we have to develop a plan. It's not enough to have an intellectual and scientific understanding of these things, but how do we bring this into effect? We are definitely, with the political programs that we have in Canada and often internationally, we are just headed right over the cliff. And so I'm asking and commenting, we need to work on this, because otherwise we shall not survive. We shall not survive. So I don't know if you have a few comments. I think what you said has been marvelously
The only thing
enlightening.
I know is political. You know, we really need to mobilize politically and pressure people who actually make decisions. And of course, we're all aware of the fact that there are interest groups that most of the opposition to this, most of the things I've proposed here, the opposition comes from corporations and
Yeah.
people with
The
interests.
big money, basically.
Well, yeah, that's a big issue, and that in a way, in a bigger project, a more comprehensive platform than I even suggested here, we have to think in terms of changing the power structure so that we get things through. I mean, some of the other papers talked about inequality, and I think we now actually see. How many of you have, in the last 3 days, come across some reference to the work of Thomas Piketty? There you go. I almost never, every day of the week, I almost every day now come across an article referring to Piketty, maybe some 3 or 4 times a day.
Yes.
This is a guy who's actually having an influence. He goes to the White House and they listen to him.
How do you spell his name?
Piketty. He's written a 700-page book.
Called Capitalism of the 21st Century.
Good. And so,
French
you know, that kind of concern about that we have to redistribute power so
Right.
that we can get something done. Because otherwise, democracy is being
Right.
stifled. Now, democracy, we could be stupid enough to all be perfect Democrats but make really bad decisions. There's no guarantee that we won't. But I'd feel a little safer if we could have a real free society with a real free press and covering the issues of the kind that I've mentioned. And so I think the whole package, to be honest, has to include the political project of changing the power structure, but we can't do it sequentially. You know, we can't, I mean, normally you try a project and you try to prioritize what you're going to do in what order. We can't do that because everything is so catastrophic that we have to handle them all at once. And so maybe we have a division of labor, maybe you can specialize in doing the political thing and you can do the economy and so on. I don't know how to divide it up, but I think we have to simultaneously have a comprehensive game plan that addresses a whole bunch of issues at once.
Just and picking up on that, there is an environmental lawyer, James Speth, basically has written a book called The Bridge to the Edge of the World, wherein he suggests that the 3 problems of economic inequality, environmental degradation, and the decline in the democracy are the 3 interrelated, comprehensive problems that need to be addressed simultaneously.
I can hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. James Speth is an environmental lawyer, formerly dean of law school, or not the law school, the environmental school, or dean of the environmental department at Yale. He's written a book called The Bridge to the Edge of the World. And after 20 years in this business, he said there are 3 interrelated problems that are all interrelated that need to be solved simultaneously. and they are economic inequality, environmental degradation, and a decline in democracy. And the thing I like about yours, of course, is it's all of those factors are integrated on the environmental side, but they have implications for the budget deficit and so on.
And they're all interrelated, all these three are all too.
And if you combine those three, there's a huge, among our civil societies, there are huge, all kinds of organizations come under that umbrella. So an organization like Lead Now, which has over 220,000 members.
What is that?
Lead Now, it's
Lead
an
Now.
advocacy group for environment and electoral reform. And they're gearing up for the 2015 election. And what they need is some content to get into the public domain so that when we have the election, we get some change in policy. Which is why I would like to send your proposal to each of the leaders of the political parties now to
Be
get
my
them
guest.
started. But it can be linked in with, I would imagine, several hundred organizations in Canada can all link into those three top issues.
What I'll do is, as soon as this bulletin is published, which will have my paper in it, they'll
Yeah.
put it on the website. So if you guys wait a few weeks, a week or two, it should be on Science for Peace website.
Good.
My paper. Somebody say something.
Other questions?
Okay.
It was a fascinating lecture. I
Bravo.
could just maybe add one comment. I'm certainly not an environmental scientist, don't know much about it, but I have a friend who runs a collective of environmental scientists in Finland, and it's actually around the world. It's called Snow Change.
a bit?
It's called Snow Change, this environmental collective. And it looks at, it's a group of environmental scientists who look at the impact of climate change on northern regions and indigenous peoples, whether it be northern Canada.
Did you say border regions?
No, northern
Northern.
regions, yeah. And so whether it be Canada or Lapland or Sami land in Finland and Russia. And, I think that part of the problem is that most of us in this room would kind of appreciate the immediacy of the issues.
Yeah.
But in northern regions, the impact is full on right now. And so I think that having that appreciation is what will compel us to action. So when you say 5 years out, we've got 5 years to kind of get moving on this. I mean, at first blush, that sounds, wow, that's awfully soon, right? But I kind of have some kind of understanding of it. And I asked my friend Taro Mastona, who is a scientist who heads this cooperative snow change. I said, what about Vancouver, the city I live in? And he intoned in his typical passive Finnish way, Robert, it's already far too late for that. And so, anyway, so again, I'm not an environmental scientist, but my sense is, these issues are a lot more immediate than what people tend to think. And for me to think about it is more kind of academic, abstract. But for people in the north, indigenous people, they're experiencing the direct impact of those issues right now, in the here and now. So, yeah, I mean, it's a call to action.
Well, I mean, most of these plans that you see, people are talking about 2050 or 2070 or, through the year 3000 or something, And I don't feel comfortable saying, well, we can wait and just see. I don't have that trust that it's going to work. We just have too many really serious, we can't predict. So.
Thank you very much.
Bravo.